Welcome back to Sustaining Soils. I'm your host, Lisa Peterson, and each episode we bring various sustainable agriculture topics and insights from experts right to your pocket. On today's episode, we're discussing a new crop and its impacts on soil health with Wendy Mosher, CEO, and Dr. John McKay, Chief Scientific Officer from New West Genetics. So why don't we just get right into it? And Wendy, why don't you start? Take it away by telling us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Lisa, for having us. We're really happy to be here. My name is Wendy. I'm the CEO of New West Genetics. And New West Genetics was started 10 years ago. We happen to have the good luck of being in one of the first states to legalize the research and development on industrial hemp. So that's when we started. Just a real quick introduction of our other founding partner who is not here, and that's Rich Fletcher. So Rich led Cargill's canola breeding program the last half of his 17, 18 years with Cargill. And then John McKay can introduce himself.
Hi. Nice to meet you and be on here. My background's in evolution and genomics and how to apply that to crop improvement, including sustainability traits. So one of the co-founders of New West as well. And we basically, when we started, it was the end of prohibition for hemp. And the first step was adapting populations to the U.S. production environments again.
Excellent. Well, glad to have both of you with us. So you've started a little bit and said that there was three of you that were co-founding New West Genetics. Give me a little bit more history on the company. Wendy, you want to start?
Sure. So, as probably most of the listeners know, industrial hemp was not allowed to be cultivated for some time in the United States. However, there were active markets in Canada, particularly on the grain side, and in Europe as well as China. So, when the discussion around the Farm Bill in 2014 first was happening, we got really excited. For scientists, it is so rare that you get to touch a crop that hasn't been touched, really, right? And indeed, before we started, no one even looked at the genomic side of the species. So it was really exciting. These skills that John has coupled with Rich made for an exciting proposition. We said, this will be fun on the weekends. Here we are 10 years later. I think what I should maybe start out with just for listeners is describing hemp a little. So it's important to understand that it is very different from its cousin, marijuana, which some people refer to it as, or cannabis. So industrial hemp is not intoxicating. And the legal definition kind of defines that. So the definition is 0.3% THC or lower. And at that level and even higher levels than that, it's impossible to get high off of it. So that's its distinguishing factor compliance-wise. And that was New West's first goal. Let's stabilize these constituents in the plant so that we can absolutely sure in the genetics, right, that it is going to be compliant. So that was goal number one. Goal number two, as John said, we were looking at how to keep the agronomics simple, how to adapt it to the U.S. I mean, it was wild. It was just feral seed and inducing variation and just starting selections from the beginning. So again, that goal of management, ease of management, we really stuck to, okay, what existing equipment is on the farm? And that's what we want to breed for. So those two goals, compliance and existing on-farm equipment, were some pretty big goals at the beginning. We've since branched out, but those were the key starting point.
Jen, how do you feel that you've accomplished those goals in the 10 years that you have been working at this?
Yeah, so pure phenotypic selection, the original form of breeding, works pretty well, but it is, a data limited process. So we started trialing in Colorado. For the first few years, we could only trial in Colorado, but we could at least create idiotypes that we started breeding for maximizing yield and sort of manageability of the crop, as Wendy said, and then at the same time started sequencing genomes and adding markers so that we could eventually use more modern genomic prediction and marker assisted breeding approaches to speed up the breeding process.
Wonderful. So let's take this to a farmer level. I farm in Northern Iowa, corn and soybeans. What options do I have with New West genetics?
I think it's important to know that New West has been, had genetics trialed and grown for commercial use in 26 states. So it's got a broad latitudinal gradient upon which it can grow. So, it is a weed, right? So it's got a lot of great adaptive qualities so that it can grow across broad regions. As far as options for growing hemp, that always, we make sure that starts out with, what are you growing for? And we actually connect farmers with buyers. And if there are no buyers in your region, we say, okay, well, it doesn't make sense, right? We don't want to sell seed unless that farmer has a place to take it. And we say, you can do a few acres just to trial it. But, we want to make sure that everyone's happy and sees a functioning marketplace first and foremost.
So let's talking about the marketplace. Let's follow that up. So, I'm Northern Iowa. It's a lot of monocrop of corn, soybeans. Where do you see in these 26 states, and specifically, where are you seeing that market? What are the final markets for industrial hemp currently?
So we, New West focus on grain primarily and somewhat on fibers. So, initially, because Rich had worked in canola, we understood oil seeds and what those markets were. And a lot of folks don't know hemp is an oil seed. So we should start out with that. So it's got, more oil than soy, a little less protein. So it serves those same markets. Initially, yields were not competitive. So it stayed very specialty. And there is specialty demand for hemp. It has within its oil profile some really unique fatty acids that are very healthy, healthier than soy, I will say, and probably comparable to canola. So there's some good specialty markets that it can address. And as I said, though, the yields weren't competitive. So, New West focusing on grain, we really focused on breeding for yield improvements, in addition to all of the other improvements that we talked about. And John can go into more the hybrid system that we've created. But, now it is competitive. We see even, what we didn't know when we started is that if you work in a new crop, you are creating markets all the way down the chain. So we're doing a lot of work in business development now for the existing processing in hemp in the U.S., hemp grain, with field companies. So there's a lot of interest in alternative oil seeds. Hemp is officially classified with the USDA as a fiber crop, and it doesn't have that big food footprint that soy has. So it's a great, excellent candidate, in fact, for fuels. So, when you talk markets, that's what we're looking at, it's typical grain, oilseed processing to address those oilseed markets and in particular, sustainable fuel.
All right. So, Wendy, you've given a good background on kind of what is hemp and industrial hemp, and also kind of where we as farmers can grow it. Obviously, there's a lot of latitudes that it can be grown at. And we've also talked about the markets a little bit. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what makes New West genetics so special. Like, what have you done different within the hemp seed marketplace?
Sure. Well, I'll start off with kind of repeating something I said before, which was that we were the first to look at the genomic side, and to, start to inform at least, the foundation of the genome, what we can refer to. So, the second thing that makes us the most distinct is we are first to market with a hybrid. So hemp is ancestrally dioecious. John McKay will explain all of this. And we have transformed it into something that is up to 100% female in the field. The females have all of the grain. So that essentially created something that is double yielding than all the other genetics that are out there. So John, do you want to explain the hybrid system we've created?
Sure. Yeah. So, as pretty much everybody uses hybrid corn planting seed, and you probably spend less time thinking about what soybean varieties you're going to buy because they're all inbred lines and not that different from each other. And so and Rich, our breeder, came from canola, which has a hybrid system as well, and pretty much all the acreages for oil production are hybrid. So, as Wendy said, hemp is dioecious. That means they're separate individuals that are male and females, like humans and chickens. That's a relatively less common phenomenon in plants and in crops. But so we were able to manipulate the sex ratio. It's normally 50-50, and we're able to figure out some genetic factors that cause that sex ratio to vary from that, and we focused on increasing the proportion of the population that is female. So skewing the sex ratio allows two things. One, one of the reasons corn was the first crop to be hybridized is it's because you can take a population and turn it into females by cutting the tops of the plants off, right? Detasseling. Pretty low tech solution that's still used today. In other crops, you need these cytoplasmic male sterility or other drivers of the sex ratio. So we were able to achieve that and create populations that are just female that we can pollinate. And that gives you, when you cross the right two lines, that gives you what's called hybrid vigor or heterosis. And that helps get seeds out of the ground. It helps them resist disease, and it increases yield by double-digit percents. The other advantage, though, as Wendy alluded to, is basically just like you don't need a giant tassel anymore in maize, you don't need that much pollen in the field with hemp. So we reduce in the planting seed for the farmer. That has a reduced population percent of males, increasing the percent of females, and that also increases yield. So the sex ratio gives you higher grain yield, and on top of that, we have this heterosis from the hybrid breeding that increases vigor and yield. So we can, with that, we can double the grain yield from an open pollinated variety.
That's phenomenal. And most farmers will definitely understand that from a hybrid side of, what hybridization did for corn. It looks like you're right at that and doing that for industrial hemp. So that's absolutely phenomenal. So how have you seen, as you're starting to build out your genetics and also starting to try to increase the market for industrial hemp, what will this new crop do for agriculture, in your opinion?
Well, one of our, in addition to our breeding goals, we really 10 years ago saw a need for farmers to have another rotation. We were very invested in helping provide an additional rotation and helping hemp become just a very traditional companion into the rotation. So hence, as I said, we really looked at the oilseed side. So that's our hope and that's our wish. And we're seeing quite a bit of traction on the fuel side. And I think that is what's going to launch this into hemp having a role. I would love to say 10 million acres within 10 years. But we all know how hard that is. That's 10 shots at bat, right? But what we can, envision quite a large number of acres based on the interest we're seeing because of Amplify, which is this hybrid trait we've created.
That's excellent. So how do you think that new crop in the rotation will influence soil health?
I love this question. Yeah. Oh, sorry, John. You can go ahead. I'll talk about my love for this question after you're done.
All right. So as Wendy mentioned, having another crop in the rotation besides corn and soy, I think we've known for thousands of years that having more crops in a rotation is better than fewer. Trying to get people to do that, the sort of subsidized markets don't necessarily favor that, but it's definitely scientifically proven. And part of that is just that you're changing the types of carbon molecules, right, that are going into your field and your soil. So it breaks the disease cycle. It can foster different, microbiomes in the soil. In systems, one of the areas of rotating into is winter wheat. In that case, there's not a lot of residue. There's not a lot of carbon getting put into the soil, so you can have overall increases in soil carbon by adding a crop with very high net primary productivity and large root systems like hemp.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right, Wendy, now it's your turn of why you love this question so much.
So, New West didn't start out thinking the emphasis would be on the fact that this is a new crop or that we would share things in common with other new crops. However, we see how true that is. And something, we share in common with them, and I'm talking about, the alternative oil seeds, is there isn't a ton of data on rotation, right? We haven't had a lot of years of being in the marketplace, but the data that we are seeing, both published and anecdotal, shows no negative impacts on the farm. And indeed, we're seeing even, multiple, and they've saw this in Canada for years, of yield bumps. And whether those yield bumps of their following crop, right? Whether those yield bumps are due to just the fact that there's a new crop in there or it's specific to hemp, that's a little bit more difficult to determine. But it's very common for our farmers to tell us their wheat crop season after their soy crop did yield more. And pest management too, right? Because the advantage new crops have is pests aren't adapted. So you've got this, early adopters probably have this kind of window of time where they don't have to worry as much about pests. And indeed, there's some literature, and not just pests, but pathogens. There's some literature that shows that cyst nematode reduction in onion, fungal disease reduction in soybean. So decent suppression percentages. I think it's 10 to 20. So the other benefit is there's it's a pro and a con. There aren't labeled products, right? When you initially start, and I realize to some farmers that seems like just an absolute con, but in some ways it was. That made it attractive for organic growers because they had those tools of, okay, here's what I can use, to grow this crop that is similar to my other crops. So, it's, while cultivation is not necessarily the answer for regenerative ag, that was a tool that farmers used. And we do have one unlabeled herbicide right now. It's a pre-emergent. It's working fabulously. We really saw it in effect this season. Hemp had, pre-emergent, especially is important for getting rid of what's there. But hemp has this advantage of an early canopy. Mm-hmm. So this is why it can work with just a pre-emergent. That early canopy shows up pretty soon, within about 3 weeks after planting, and it really shades out weeds. So some people really like that idea of less herbicide, and that's certainly possible with this system we see with the pre-emergent.
It's definitely a challenge that we face as farming, right? Is how do you control pests and weeds, and also when you're cropping, your cropping system staying the same, and the resistance that develops with that. So I definitely can see where having another crop in the rotation with different pest pressure would definitely be a benefit. John, I want to go back on something that you said as well and dive a little bit deeper in that before we head into kind of the market and where acres are heading in the future. I want to dive back into, you said something about a deep root system that hemp has. So talk to me a little bit more about that and how that can help influence soil health as well.
Yeah, so one of the features that comes out of hemp is because when it was prohibited during the Green Revolution of the invention of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer and then adapting cropping systems to have high nitrogen inputs. What you see in a lot of crops is that the native ability of the crop to actually go get their own nitrogen has decreased. They're getting lazy because the breeders are just selecting for high yield under very high N. So this crop has deep roots that can take up nitrogen that's too deep in the soil for corn, right? It can't get it can get down a lot further. That also, it can also take up more water from down there, and then there's this deterministic effect in soils carbon that the deeper the carbon is in the soil, the longer it persists. Carbon at the surface, residue at the surface or topsoil turns back into carbon dioxide in a year. But then as you go below 20 or even 50 centimeters, you have this much longer persistence of that carbon. The other thing Wendy alluded to is that the population density of hemp is quite high. So 200,000 to 300,000 plants an acre. That's how it's able to outcompete the pigweed and the other things that that you can't do on 30-inch rows. And then that's from the root input side. That's an order of magnitude more plants putting roots into the ground, right? So the root biomass effect total on the acre becomes much, much larger than corn or soy.
I did not realize 200 to 300,000 plants an acre. That's crazy. And yes, it could really shade out all the water hemp that's on our farm at the moment that we did not get this year. Our weed control was not phenomenal. So that's really fascinating to me. And has there been any studies done as well around, a lot of times we'll use cover crops and a radish here to try to break up some of the compaction, with a longer, deeper kind of taproot. Is there any research too around hemp on just some of the compaction and from a soil health standpoint on that way as well?
Yeah, there's some work, from the EU, right? Because obviously the one challenging thing about rotation is it takes decades to get replicated data points. But the ability of it within, say, a spring wheat rotation in Southern Europe is breaking up that hard pan. It's getting down to the water table and increasing the aeration and water flow into that soil over years.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, I'm going to switch gears on us again, and I'm curious how farmers and growers have responded to the new crop and to the new genetics that you've developed.
Well, we've certainly developed a lot of relationships over the years with farmers. It's a special farmer that's willing to try something brand new. And so, almost to a person, the farmers we've worked with have said, we really like this. It's too tall. Frequently, we heard. And so we've bred it shorter and shorter. However, they say we love what it does for our following rotations. We want to grow it, but we need more of a market. So when you're going to farmers and saying, okay, we've got demand from this processor for 60 acres or 80 acres, that's challenging, right? When you've got your maybe 1,000 acres in soy or corn that you need to take care of. It's challenging to divert your attention to something so small. So that's pretty much been the pattern of, we love to grow this crop. We will grow it if you bring a market. So I think that's perfectly reasonable, makes a lot of sense. And it's what every new crop struggles with. And that's the challenge, right? How do we function in a exponentially larger system of agriculture devoted to corn and soy? How do you get a foothold in that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you didn't know that you needed to be both geneticists as well as market developers, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's a whole different challenge.
That's my job. Yeah.
Well, as we wrap up today and we're getting close to here on time, anything else that you would like to shout out or talk about that I missed today as far as looking at what you have done for the industry and also as industrial hemp in the overall?
I guess I would like to draw attention, a little more attention to the carbon side. John McKay does research at Colorado State University, where he's a professor on carbon sequestration. So I just want to tie that whole conversation of the root mass and point out what he said. Again, the durability of that carbon is, can be decades because it's so deep. So the potential to, not just the fact hemp uses less nitrogen or, less water, but that potential for ag to solve greenhouse gas emission is very real with some of these crops. So I just wanted to, drive that point home of, its ability to sequester carbon far exceeds a lot of the crops that we're growing now.
Excellent. Well, and that definitely has continued to be something that is very in the forefront more on farmers and producers and where this carbon market is going to go and how can we capture that within the ag community.
Yeah, no solid answer yet, but lots of shots. People are taking lots of shots, which I appreciate.
Yep. And I think, a lot of us are sitting on the side waiting to see how this is all going to play out and where the regulation side's going to come to and how we're incentivizing farmers as well.
Yeah, I met this summer, I talked to a couple of farmers who are participating in those private markets, the insetting within some of the commodity program, or, I should say the ABCs that have laid out their own programs. So, it's happening. Some farmers are seeing revenue for their practices in general. Mm-hmm. Where we would like to see it go next is let's look at, let's have the physiology of the plant count. If, the research that's coming out of multiple places now, besides, John's lab at CSU, is showing that, these deep roots have a massive impact, and indeed more carbon stored impacts than management practice changes. So let's see that physiology, become a consideration in whether it's regulatory or whether it's private markets. I think that's a very reasonable ask.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. John, anything else you want to add as we're wrapping up our conversation today?
No.
Oh, can I add one thing? I just want to say we did do an experiment this year with mycorrhiza from Valent on our field. And while we don't have the data calculated, it was visually obvious. The impact of that mycorrhiza was, by an order of magnitude visually. You could see the increased vigor and increased height. And so we suspect increased yield. We're going to measure that, but it was some impressive results.
Excellent. Well, that's great to hear. Well, that wraps up our discussion for today. Thank you, Wendy and John, for your time and your insights. If you enjoyed the show, we'd appreciate your support by subscribing to our YouTube channel or following us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, leaving a review and sharing the episode with a friend would really help us out. You can also find us on social media on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn by searching Valent Biosciences or going to our website, valentbiosciences.com. All right, Wendy or John, where can we find you and any other shout outs you want to give before we end the program?
Please follow us additionally on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all the likely places, as well as our website, www.newwestgenetics.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much and have a great day. Thanks for listening.